This year's student scholarships goes to Ida Edin from the Linköping University. She will now present why she received a scholarship that focuses on the systematic use of the planetary boundaries to solve the climate issue when it comes to the energy dimension.
Okay, thank you. I would like to begin by thanking both Ragn-Sells and Ragnar Foundation for organizing this student pitch competition. I feel very honored to be here today and to present my set of ideas. So I have developed an action plan within the subject energy storage from waste flows to enable smart electrification of transport. So on this subject, I have come up with a set of actions to mitigate climate change. I would like to say a couple of words about myself. I am currently doing a Master of Science degree in Energy, Environment and Management at Linköping University. And currently I am pursuing my master's program within mechanical engineering and more specifically electric power. So I would like to present the framework for the student competition. The theme is not all boundaries are meant to be pushed. So the task was to identify the planetary boundary that is most feasible to be restored within the near future, and then to come up with an action plan for mitigating this and to also analyze the potential trade-offs and impacts on other boundaries except for the one that was chosen. So we have already heard a lot about the planetary boundaries today, but as you know, 7 of them are already transgressed. And now I'm going to give you my motivation to which boundary is most feasible to be restored within the near future. So this was, as you mentioned, a really hard task, but these are my main arguments. So I selected climate change, and the first idea I had when I started thinking about this problem was that since overshooting one boundary can negatively impact the other boundaries, I was analyzing the already transgressed ones at first. And secondly, climate change has a large impact on the entire ecosystem of Earth, since the emissions have a strong impact on other systems. The third argument is that climate change already receives a lot of political and media attention today, and I think that this is a very significant contributing argument to the feasibility of restoring it. And to some extent we already know what is needed to be done from a technical perspective. It's more of a matter how do we implement it and how do we change our behaviors. So since my action plan is focusing on sustainable electrification, which is a central question for a lot of companies, I have to some extent used Ragn-Sells as an exemplification. So from my perspective, I analyzed Ragn-Sells and identified that this company's operations involve materials, residual flows, and transport. And a large share of Ragn-Sells emissions come from fossil fuel transport. And the company themselves already suggest route optimization, fleet renewal, and substitution of fossil fuels with renewable alternatives as possible actions. Furthermore, the company aims to reduce extraction and processing of virgin raw materials. So this is what I kept in mind when I tried to come up with possible actions from a company perspective. So a little bit more about the background to the action plan. So as you know, fossil fuel is a key driver for global warming, and emissions from domestic transport account for approximately 1/3 of Sweden's total emissions. So this is something that contributes to climate change very much. And therefore we have a great potential for reducing emissions within the transport sector. So we have an increasing interest in transport electrification already today, but at the same time there are discussions going on about, for example, power grid limitations, and this can restrict the development of charging infrastructure, and it demands for flexibility and for smart charging. And there is also an uncertainty regarding the critical raw materials that are required to produce batteries. So as you can see, electrification has a great potential of mitigating climate change, but at the same time, it's associated with a lot of challenges to make it a circular solution. So I will try to explain the main areas of the strategy. So the idea is to strive for utilizing energy waste flows to as large extent as possible within companies or other sectors, and to develop sustainable energy storage. And this can, for example, be in the form of stationary battery storage, could also include second life electric vehicle batteries. And to make this as sustainable as possible, we need to develop battery recycling and establish the closed loop systems for the critical materials that we are utilizing. Then electrification plays a key role, since electrifying heavy vehicle fleets can reduce companies' contributions to fossil fuel use, but also by investing in semi-public charging stations that also can be used by private cars, we can also target the private sector. And to make this sustainable from a logistic perspective, we need to prioritize fast charging for heavy vehicles, for example, charging during work hours, and then using passenger cars as a more stable load on the power grid. So a few words about how this action plan contributes to circularity. As we are currently seeing an increasing fleet of electrified cars, we will naturally in the future also have a larger share of second life electric vehicle batteries that can be used as stationary storage, and thereby balancing the loads on the power grid. A central part of the plan is also to recover the waste flows and avoid them from being wasted. And the electrification is also key, as I mentioned before. And in the future, if the concept of vehicle-to-grid solution is developed, we can also use, for example, passenger cars as a way of further balancing the loads on the power grid. And the smart charging is reduced to minimize the peak loads and thereby minimizing the need of grid expansions. So, is this strategy feasible to implement today already, or what are the drivers and barriers? Well, I would say that from a company's perspective, if I focus on Ragn-Sells again, I think that the management is already prioritizing electrification and optimization, so they would probably be positive to this type of solutions. Regarding the municipalities, they are very important for example, permits regarding infrastructure for charging. And an idea there is to give subsidies or faster permits if they are building chargers that can also be used by the public, so that we also maximize the utilization of charging infrastructure and stimulate the national EV adoption. The energy providers and operators may require some new business models to implement some of the tools, but they will likely have a strong interest in the storage solutions, since this helps balancing the electricity system. And the customers and public will be indirectly impacted as well. Vehicle-to-grid models could add value for them long term. I had one idea where, for example, people that live in multi-dwelling households that lack access of a private charger can charge their car at the company site if this is integrated to areas within the city where also there are a lot of households. So then new customer segments could be reached and to use the electrified vehicles. And since I exemplified quite a lot with Ragn-Sells, I would also mention how I think this plan could be scalable. So I think that all industries that involve residual flows could benefit from some of the tools because they try to adapt a more circular view on their flows and try to utilize more of the waste. And all industries that involve transport can strive for electrifying their vehicle fleets. And as I mentioned before, I think that the tools stimulate the national EV adoption, since both companies and the private sector is targeted. And internationally, I would say this would work for countries with a similar energy system as Sweden. However, I think that also countries with, for example, a less developed power grid could adapt some of the tools. For example, the stationary battery storage with second life batteries could be a more economically feasible solution, and also maybe substitute some diesel generating units in some countries. So part of the task was also to identify in which way this solution will interact with the other planetary boundaries. And here I have identified 4 main interactions. So regarding the novel entities, EVs and batteries require critical materials, which is a risk when it comes to novel entities. But if we prioritize the second life usage and enforce sustainable mining and recycling technologies, the impacts can be minimized. The same yields for biodiversity and land use, because risks arise when we occupy natural land, which can happen when we build more infrastructure, for example. So we have to keep in mind that net positive environmental impact should be achieved in all the investments. However, for atmospheric aerosols, I have identified that electrification reduces the fossil fuel use, and thereby it can actually have a positive external effect by lowering the aerosol concentrations. And the same yields for ocean acidification, since this declines when CO2 emissions fall. So we are at the conclusions of this presentation. So I hope that you have saw that I identifies a new set of ideas. And to summarize, I would say that smart electrification of fleets reduces emissions while benefiting companies, individuals, and energy systems. And the storage and charging should be implemented sustainably, which will minimize the demand for virgin materials. And as I mentioned, the plan could be broadly applicable across industries both in Sweden and internationally. And the implementation involves some risks related to other planetary boundaries, but could also have positive spillover effects for some of the boundaries. So with that said, I'd like to thank you.
So stay put, because what's happening now is that we're going to have a ceremony. Of course, hand over a diploma, hand over some flowers. So please, we have 2 jury members with us. We have Mattias Lindahl, professor at Linköping University. And I asked Mattias before, just to make sure, have you read what kind of university they come from? No, I blank it, he said. So he guaranteed me that he should not do that.
That would be unfair.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Mm.